3 rings for the elven kings under the sky, 7 for the dwarf lords in their halls of stone, 9 for mortal men doomed to die, 1 for the Dark Lord on his dark throne. These are not just words contained within the poem typically referred to as the ring verse, nor are they just among the most famous and well-known words found within j.r.r. Tolkien's novel, The Lord of the Rings. They are what I would call the blueprint of Tolkien's Second and Third Age mythology, a mythology of corruption, of power, preservation, and the perversion of the natural order. Welcome to Forged in Shadow, a series in which I explore the rings of power of Tolkien's legendarium. Over 10 parts, I will take you from the firelit forges of Eregion to Mount Doom, exploring topics such as the importance of the rings in Tolkien's mythology, the motives behind their creation, their effects, spiritual symbolism, their temptation, and misconceptions. As this is part 1, I want to provide a roadmap for the series and what you can expect from each part before we really begin. If you want to just get into it, please use the chapters I provided and skip to the Forging of the Rings. So whether you are steeped in the wider legendarium or just beginning your journey into Tolkien's mythology, I want to welcome you to this series. My look at the rings as symbols of the corruptive influence of power, good intentions leading to a fall, and how temptation can be overcome by wisdom. Enjoy. Part 1. What they are and why they matter. Much of what I discuss in this episode will be covered in far greater detail as the series progresses, but this introduction lays the foundation for the series and provides the necessary background. What are the Rings of Power, and why do they loom so large over Tolkien's wider mythology? Part 2. Eregion and the Lord of Gifts. This episode explores the foundation of Eregion, its importance to elves of the Second Age following the end of Morgoth's Age, the First Age. Sauron's appearance as the mysterious Lord of Gifts is covered as he leads the elves into their second great fall. Part 3. Celebrimbor, the heir of Fëanor. Here I focus on Celebrimbor himself, the grandson of the infamous and legendary Fëanor. I examine their similarities, torn between legacy and redemption, and destroyed by their own creations. Part 4. The 3 Elven Rings and their light. As the name suggests, this part focuses on the rings known as the 3, Vilya, Nenya, and Narya. What distinguishes them as tools to preserve beauty, resist decay, and how they reflect the tragedy of the fading of the elves. Part 5. Sauron, the Elves, and the War for Souls. Part 5 is where I take a look at the deeper motives of Sauron and the Elves. Both feared change, both sought preservation, and both had to pay a price for attempting to circumvent the natural order. Part 6. The One Ring and the Shadow of Morgoth. I turn to the forging of the One Ring, created in the fires of Mount Doom through the will of Sauron, but made possible through the corruption of Sauron's fallen master, Morgoth. Why is the ring gold? Is the inscription important? Why does it corrupt? These questions will be covered. Part 7. The 9, the 7, and the corruption of kings. The rings that eventually made their way into the hands of men and dwarves are covered here. What happened when these rings were used? What do they teach us about pride and greed? What are the consequences of mortals becoming entangled in the world of immortals? Part 8. Temptation, misuse, and the fall of the wise. Even the very wise are not safe. Are they at greater risk of corruption? This part examines the obsession with control, misguided wisdom, and how various figures handled the influence of Sauron's master ring, from Isildur to Gollum, from Saruman to Galadriel. Part 9. Truth, Lies, and Misconceptions. The penultimate part attempts to debunk some common myths. Why do these misconceptions exist? I will explore the influence of adaptations and even Tolkien's text when it comes to distorting what the rings can and cannot do, and how their written history is often ignored. Part 10. Your Questions Answered, Q&A Special. I close the series with a community Q&A. Throughout the entire series, I will be paying attention to comments, questions, interpretations, and disagreements from channel supporters, members, and viewers. I will expand upon anything that requires more detail or explanation, and directly provide my opinions and answers to complete the Forged in Shadow series. In those days the smiths of Ostinethiel surpassed all that they had contrived before, and they took thought, and they made rings of power. In the time of the Lord of the Rings, in the late Third Age of Middle-earth, the rings of power became forgotten relics of a forgotten age to all but a chosen few. Thousands of years had passed since the beginning of the Third Age, and thousands of years still since their creation in the Mid-Second Age. But the wise know the history of the rings. They know they were forged by intent, with all but one of them forged in the realm of Eregion by the elves, now a ruin given back to nature. And they know all too well that the greatest of the rings, the Master Ring, was forged by the Dark Lord Sauron in the land of Mordor. Tolkien writes in the Silmarillion, "Now these were the rings of power, made by the elven smiths of Eregion, and their craft was guided by Sauron, and he aided them secretly." The power in the name Rings of Power is the attempt to raise Middle-earth and those bearing rings to the stature of the lands beyond the sea and those who dwell beyond the sea. Could elves make Middle-earth as fair as Eresia, or even Valinor? And Sauron approached the elves of Eregion to offer his knowledge that he alone held in Middle-earth, and the chance to labour together for the enrichment of Middle-earth, and to teach power and knowledge that would increase the skill and subtlety of the Noldor remaining in Middle-earth. Those ever seeking to improve their works, and those stuck between two worlds, the mortal and changing world of Middle-earth that was not to be theirs forever, and the unchanging land of bliss that Noldor had departed in the First Age. And as their project began, an unknown number of lesser rings were forged before the elves reached the height of their skill to forge the Great Rings of Power, eventually forging 19 Great Rings. The wizard, Gandalf, describes both of these sets of rings to Frodo in The Lord of the Rings. The lesser rings were only essays in the craft before it was full grown, and to the elven smiths they were but trifles, yet still to my mind dangerous for mortals. But the great rings, the rings of power, they were perilous. And secretly, Sauron made his one ring, making it the 20th and final great ring of power, a ring that would rule all the others and bind their own power to it, essentially binding the elves to him. The rings would be subject wholly to the One Ring, and would last only as long as the Master Ring lasted. But despite the perilous potency of the Great Rings of Power, the greatest of them contained much of Sauron's strength and will, creating a ring of surpassing potency, to perceive all that was done through the other rings, to see and govern the thoughts of those who wore them, bringing beings of great will under the will of Sauron. Each of the Great Rings, including the One Ring, aimed to enhance the power of the bearer on Earth. But what does power mean in this context? A word that is so often thrown around when discussing the actions of figures in Tolkien's Legendarium. It is not martial prowess or the ability to defeat another in combat. That is a power of a kind, though I'd call it strength or ability. The power held by figures in Tolkien's mythology, in my understanding, refers to the strength of will, the ability to influence the world and bring about change through one's willpower, to manifest that will into reality itself. The greater the power, the greater the ability to achieve this, and the greater the risk of corruption. But this condition Iluvatar made, or it is the necessity of their love, that their power should thenceforth be contained and bounded in the world, to be within it forever, until it is complete, so that they are its life, and it is theirs. And therefore they are named the Valar, the powers of the world. Here Tolkien describes the Valar, named the powers of the world. Why? Because the power contained within them is bound to their authority, and to the world itself. They are its life, and it is theirs. Their influence can be seen, heard, and felt in the design of the world. Their desires shaped it, and they are bound to it until it is complete. Their power has nothing to do with fighting or combat, but their innate gifts will bring about real change and influence on a scale we can scarcely imagine. The mightiest of them, Melkor, desired the greatest change according to his own will, and fell to such a low in his attempt that it would never be reached by any other. Only one power is greater than the Valar, Eru, who dwells outside of time. This is important for me to explain, because the Rings of Power were instruments of will, both Sauron's and the Elves. The Elves, fearing change and loss, sought to preserve what they loved most. Sauron, seeing the desolation of Middle-earth following the First Age, believed the powers of the West had forgotten about it. His pride grew as much as his hatred of the Elves, and he desired to also halt change, but through domination, to bring others with substantial power, the Elves, under his greater power. Both desired an unchanging land of their bliss, to raise themselves in stature, but only one desired the domination of wills, the one who would forge his one ring to accomplish that task. The chief power of all the rings alike was the prevention or slowing of decay. They would seem to confer invisibility, but their true nature was to enhance the natural powers of a possessor. Tolkien's words in Letter 131 are among the most important written about the Rings of Power. They tell us that the rings are more than what we might just call magic rings or artifacts. They are reflections of desire manifested into objects that could be used in the physical world to bring those desires to fruition. The definition of power, as I described previously. And enhancing the natural powers of a possessor does not necessarily equate to something good. Why would it? The Elves desired the preservation of a land they had grown to love, which would be subject to mortal change and decay in their view. Immortals bound to the world as long as it lasts, dwelling in a land that would not stand still for them. Their 3 rings were unsullied by never being directly touched by Sauron, yet were still products of his teachings and knowledge. They represent preservation, beauty, and healing, echoing the Elves' link to the Undying Lands and Arda. But others eventually received great rings of power, which I will detail and explain later in the series. The dwarves, through their making, were naturally hardy and extremely difficult to dominate, but had a great love of what their maker, the Vala Aule, also loved, the substances of which Arda is made, of gems that lie deep in the earth, of gold that is fair in the hand. Their love was corrupted, becoming a desire to obtain more, to grow in their strength through riches only they could keep, to hoard and isolate. We then witness a corrupted form of the spirit of the dwarves, unable to be dominated, but still able to fall to greed and pride. And men, whom Sauron had long corrupted and found the easiest to sway of all the peoples of the earth, became ensnared to the full meaning of the word, using their newfound power to obtain glory in a span of years far beyond what was natural. That same unending life became unendurable. Their wills evaporated, and they became bound to the Lord of the Rings, shadows under his greater shadow as the Ringwraiths, dark servants who would ceaselessly serve Sauron until his downfall, thousands of years after they fell to darkness. More than any other race, the experience of men with the Rings of Power symbolises lust for power itself, to elevate themselves to the same position as immortals in a fear of death. It's the fall of man. Sauron's desire for order and control is shown to us through the symbolism of the One Ring, the singular object above all others, with Sauron viewing himself as the greatest single authority in Middle-earth. No one could be his equal, just as the One Ring had no equal. He was willing to pervert the greatest gift given to any rational being, free will, a gift given by Eru himself. The pride and ego of Sauron had him use his free will to dominate others and remove their own. Nothing is evil in the beginning. Even Sauron was not so. The desire and pursuit of greater power than what is naturally possessed comes at a cost. Those with good motives can fall. Those who already possess great power can desire more and take advantage of those with less to obtain it. The risk of a spiritual and moral fall. Even the elves desired this greater power to elevate themselves in Middle-earth above the stature of other elves, above dwarves and men. a greater position than what they would occupy in the west under the Ainur and the great elves dwelling in bliss. Their unsullied rings even became useless to them, while Sauron bore the One Ring. A greater power within reach, but at the cost of their independence and free will, a constant reminder of their folly. Sauron's One Ring was created by him to only be worn and used by the Dark Lord himself, but as I will explore in this series, others did hold it, and others were tempted by it. The cost of the greatest power imaginable on earth could be slavery and torment. Even Sauron himself was arguably enslaved to the ring he made, focusing so intently on recovering it after it was lost to him, that he was blinded to all else, becoming so focused on the great power of the One Ring that the idea of others destroying it became laughable. If he were wisest, which he considered himself to be, and he would never pass on such a power, why would anyone else if they held wisdom? His attempt to gain greater power created the very thing that led to his defeat, as the One Ring was unmade in the Third Age. And the cost to dwarves and men is easiest for all to see. For the former, it cost many their lives, as their greed and isolation invited the greed of others, notably dragons, and the wrath of Sauron himself, unwilling to accept that he could not dominate their very souls under his greater will. With men, they would no longer be visible in the material world unless cloaked as agents of the Dark Lord. They lost what would make them human in the first place, as they became monsters surrounded by an aura of fear that would isolate them from others of their race. As this series begins, I think I can answer why the Rings of Power matter. In Tolkien's myth, they are not tools of simple magic. They are crucibles of character, they are tests, and symbols of desire. Their forging is linked to the relationship of elves and Sauron to Middle-earth, of death and deathlessness, and their history as they eventually make their way into the hands of others shows us the cost of obtaining power beyond your measure. Their meaning is spiritual, philosophical, and existential. In exploring the vast history of Middle-earth, the Rings of Power directly and indirectly can be linked to the fall of the greatest kingdom of men, Numenor, the rise of Mordor, the long defeat and the fading of the elves, as well as what must be overcome to usher in men as the stewards of Middle-earth in a new age. But this is just the beginning, and in Eregion and the Lord of Gifts, I will take you back to the Second Age and the founding of Eregion, as Sauron falls back into evil as Middle-earth recovers from the devastation of the First Age wars against Sauron's master, Morgoth. I want to show my appreciation to the following people for their unbelievably generous support of me and my channel: Patricia, Victus Schmmidtt, Moses Gunn, NCV 1993, and Seraphim 38. Thank you.